Welcome back, everybody. This is a really exciting team of panelists. So without further ado, I'll let them kind of introduce themselves. A quick 1 to 2 minute introduction into you and your role and what you do at your current company and what its focus on rare disease.
I guess I'll start. Lainey Mosley, and thank you all for coming and watching my film, Rare, A Rare Disease Revolution. This was my first documentary. My background is as a journalist. I've worked for CBS and NBC over the years. So I'm just thrilled to have this opportunity to share this film with you.
Nick Encina, I'm the Executive Director of the International Consortium in Newborn Sequencing. Full disclosure, I'm not a rare disease expert. I'm not a clinician either. My career started in the Human Genome Project while I was in graduate school. I also was a medical technician right before that for Lorenzo Odone. So it started in rare disease, the rare disease world. He was a patient of adrenal leukodystrophy, which motivated me to go back to grad school. And then leap forward a few decades through biotech companies and software companies. I ended up in public health. First starting a research program on precision medicine at Harvard, and then the consortium that I'm here to talk about, which basically unites the global programs doing genomic newborn screening to share evidence and harmonize on the data and the learnings coming out to try to incorporate genomics into the traditional newborn screening world.
Thanks for having me, Derek. My name is Tim Yu. I'm a neurologist and a human geneticist at Boston Children's Hospital and Harvard Medical School. I have the pleasure of having worked in this space for about 17 years, and our work has started off from trying to name the conditions that you heard about in the film to working with many of the families to try to develop therapies for these conditions. Our team, about 7 or 8 years ago, developed a precision antisense oligonucleotide therapy for one of these ultra-orphan conditions that has been a helpful template for trying to see how to sustain further development through regulatory approval and hopefully someday towards actually a sustainable reimbursable model for other conditions like the ones represented by some of my friends in this film.
I'm Alexander Souza. I'm a postdoctoral researcher here at the Broad Institute in the lab of David R. Liu. And I focus on precision gene editing, which allows us to rewrite misspellings in DNA precisely with the goal of correcting the underpinnings of genetic disease. And, at the purest sense, I'm one of the people in the lab, trying to manipulate DNA every day. And the idea is taking these cutting edge technologies that we have and pushing them to the envelope of the performance and seeing if we can, translate them and hopefully build proof of concept therapies for some very challenging rare genetic disorders.
Hey everyone, my name is Johanna Mondesier. I'm a physician scientist and an academic hematologist. I trained at the University of Paris and did my PhD at the Dana-Farber. I now work for Every Cure, founded by David Fajgenbaum, whom you saw in the documentary. And Every Cure's mission is to identify and develop drug repurposing opportunities using AI and especially machine learning algorithms to make sure that we use the full potential of all existing drugs.
Winston Yan, I'm a physician scientist. I did my PhD actually in this building, working on CRISPR-Cas9 technologies, early CRISPR development, and then right afterwards had the privilege of starting a biotech company, Arbor Biotechnologies. That has now become a clinical stage gene editing company. It's been a labor of love to see a program all the way through from discovery and the initial bench work, literally pipetting that enzyme in a lab, now to actually dosing a patient. But it was actually the motivation in Rare really came from going back to medical school in the middle of working on Arbor and seeing exactly what Wendy Chung talked about, right? The immense need of rare genetic, that unmet medical need, it's everywhere in a place like Boston Children's. So that's where I met Tim, because this idea of why is it fair for these programmable therapies not to be able to be used to help these patients? So in my, my spare time, I also help work on the N of 1 collaborative with Tim. We started it to really take that line of where commercialization is possible use those templates that Tim was talking about and help drive that sustainability and scalability towards hopefully even a single N of one day.
Thank you all for being here. I'm really excited for the conversation today. Lainey, I'm going to start with you just because of in the film, we could see, 2022, 2023. Do you have any updates since post-production that you'd like to share with the audience today?
Yeah, it's really hard to sort of say this is where I'm going to end the film because, it's not a Hollywood ending. There's still, work that's being done and all the families are continuing to fight for their therapeutics. But I'm beginning to see, everything moves so fast that now the most exciting update is Amber, who presents as she's a hot mess, is not a hot mess. She has managed to succeed in getting a gene therapy into Maxwell, and that is, as of last week, they're at the Cleveland or Cincinnati Children's Hospital, and Maxwell has completed his gene therapy, and now they're just, sort of waiting for next steps to discharge him and hope for the best that it's a success. So that's our best update so far, but I'm sure we're going to have others in the months to come.
No, that's great. Please keep us updated. If there's a way that we could sign up, I guess, to learn more, that would be fantastic. I think I'm going to start with this question that I think really kind of was a theme of the movie. This larger ecosystem. There's a lot of puzzle pieces, if you will. There's a lot of stakeholders that are involved in rare disease research. So I'm going to start with you, Tim. And then again, everyone please chime in if you'd like. If you could change one thing about how this larger ecosystem works or doesn't work, what would it be and why? If you could pick one.
Sure. This is an incredibly powerful film. And it's not just because I know some of the families whose stories are represented here. And it's incredibly powerful. And it's also a film that I hope makes everybody in this room actually profoundly uncomfortable. Because part of what you're seeing in this film is the extraordinary lengths to which families are forced to go to make a system that was not built for them work. And by work, that's a generous definition of the term. They're trying to repurpose a system built for something else for this really difficult job they've all taken on. And I say this as a physician and as a scientist who understands and appreciates the brilliance that goes into generating these tools and then hopefully some wisdom in applying them. And we've built up systems for using these tools and caring for patients and taking the tools and developing them into drugs through efforts of many people in this room. But somehow that system hasn't factored in this variable of conditions that are on this end of the spectrum where there aren't enough kids to justify investment. And I think that as you see this film, that to me, the one thing I'd like to change is for everyone to come away from it and think, what is it about what I do that could be repurposed in a systematic and intentional way to support families and disease communities that these families represent? And for each of the parents that are in here, they represent just the tip of the iceberg there. For each one of their amazing stories, there are hundreds of families with the same condition for whom this disease is devastating, and they don't make it onto the screen because they're not able to marshal the efforts required to do this. And I think that we have to, as a society, figure out a new contract by which scientists, drug companies, regulators can talk about important issues of access, cost, safety, scientific evidence, and come up with something that's not perfect, but that helps create a system to support folks like this. I think that's beginning to happen. I think that these are ways of starting that conversation. I think the tools are getting much better, but I think that that's really the biggest thing. It's not one thing I can point to in the science or the regulatory or the business policies. It's really just sort of the commitment of folks to recognize that, hey, just because this is the way things currently are, it doesn't mean that it has to be that way. We have to be really creative and invent something new for them.
Okay.
Nick, I'm going to ask you on the theme of public policy. That is one area that we often, at least, our company is called Worldwide Clinical Trials. We feel that once the clinical trial is successful, we've done our job. But there's this whole access, piece that Tim was talking about. What about maybe public policy and icons? How does that fit into the conversation, if at all? And I'm sure you have an opinion that it very much does, but curious of the public policy spin here.
The world that I live in, it thoroughly permeates every part of what we do. Because just to be clear, so the work that the consortium that I run focuses on is upstream. So it's trying to take genomics from a place of diagnosis and treatment and going much further upstream to a place where we use it for screening presumably healthy newborns. So for those of you familiar, there's a newborn screening, a traditional newborn screening program in the US and many countries abroad. Started in the 60s, PKU, Robert Guthrie, and it's grown incrementally over the last 60 years or so to where we have a unified panel that has a list of conditions that are recommended for screening called the RUSP that contains anywhere between 60 and 70 conditions, core and secondary conditions. And so that largely screens for metabolic conditions. What we're trying to do, and before I take a step there, nearly 100% of babies in the US are screened when they're born. You take a heel prick, take some blood out, and you look for these conditions. Wendy was talking about it in the movie that which conditions are screened for is left to the states to decide. So there's high variability. In Massachusetts, I think we screen for about 75. So it's the list plus some. California could be, I think it's around 80. But if you go down to states like Louisiana and others, it could go down to the 30s. So there's high variability across states. There's obviously high variability across countries. And so what we're trying to do is look at that world where we look for these conditions and saying, what more could we do if we're looking for genetic conditions? Because we're not looking, genetics is used, but mostly in secondary findings. And so what we're looking now is to say, how do we take genomics upstream, not for diagnosis, but for screening to identify babies in the first place so we can potentially intervene early before the conditions become too severe or where nothing can be done about it. So because we're looking at it from that perspective, a lot of it falls into the public health sector. And so policy plays everything into that, from what diseases you can screen for to you look at regulatory policy around what you can do with the data, what you screen for. You look into reimbursement policy around who pays for what, all the way down to public health policy into what follow-on treatment looks like and who pays for it. And there are all kinds of things in between from societal perspectives and ethical perspectives. So really, policy plays into almost everything that we do, which can slow things down, but for the right reasons, obviously.
You sense a theme of innovation with our panelists, not even just for the evening, but just with the film, but also in your individual careers and your company initiatives. So Johanna, I'm going to ask you specifically around Every Cure. We see a lot of David and a lot of the films that we see in rare disease. It's a trailblazer for Castleman disease, but also this approach of drug repurposing. Can you give us an idea of what's the focus plan for Every Cure for this year and what exciting initiatives you have around drug repurposing for next year?
I'll just start by saying that I love what you said, and I think David really tried to create a systematic approach to drug repurposing. And I think this is a big change in paradigm, is to say, let's try to find every potential indication for all the FDA-approved drugs that we have. And this is very novel. And it's even more novel because we are using AI to explore the vast landscape of biomedical knowledge that we have right now and to identify promising drug disease matches. So we're just starting, but we already have programs to explore drug repurposing opportunities in several diseases. And we try to develop to close the gaps, whatever that is, if it's lab work that's needed or a clinical trial, to make sure that these drugs are delivered to the patients. So it's really new. And as a doctor, and this is my personal experience, I've been there in the hospital where you have zero options and you look up on PubMed and you see potential drugs that you can use, right? But it's at your own individual scale. What we do at Every Cure is really to try to explore all drugs for all diseases. It doesn't mean that we'll find drug repurposing opportunity for all the diseases that exist, but it's really exploring the full potential of all the drugs. So we have programs right now. I hope that, in 5 years from now, we'll have 20, 25 drugs repurposed. Again, this is like a process. So every iteration, so it's based on machine learning. So everything we learn from this machine learning algorithm that we have is fed back into the model, and we can see how it evolves at each iteration, and it's better and better. So I have a lot of hope for the new opportunities that we're going to discover and explore.
It's exciting. Exciting to see what
very
Every Cure is working on. I'm going to kind of go back to what's exciting you most in terms of scientific and emerging therapies, and what do you think will be kind of mainstream, to your point, in 5 years? What are you excited about individually, whether it's a therapy or a technology or something happening with FDA, for example, that you think within 5 years we'll nail it? So I'm going to start with Alexander on this one, but I'd love for each of you to chime in here.
Yeah, I'm going to be very selfish. I think precision gene editing is is astounding. I mean, we have this Thrive program that just came out. We have a huge kind of impetus to see how we can expand precision gene editing for the first time. And I'm stealing this from my boss, David. We have kind of a situation where we have many of the tools, or all of the tools, depending on the indication, that we need to actually put together a therapy. It's about doing the work and building the pipeline and building the teams to actually go through with it. And for other targets, there's one main risk, and it's surmountable for us to go after that to potentially bring this to patients. So, starting back in 2013, 2012, 2015. When we were just doing nucleases, and now we're able to actually rewrite DNA very precisely. It's been like a rocket ship of progress, and we really are on the cusp of, getting after some of these really special targets. Yeah.
Can I follow up on Alex?
Please.
I agree with Alex wholeheartedly for the promise that precision gene editing can bring. But I'm going to pose to the audience that actually introduces another problem, which is actually we divide up rare disease genes that were already, populations of, I have a broken gene, SLC6A1. That now, with precision gene editing, you break it up into tinier mutations, right? And I'm going to tie in Tim's, what should we change, right? One thing is thinking about making a drug for every single mutation as an entirely new product, right? With modern gene editing technologies, you're essentially just changing a very small target sequence that may be like 1-2% of the entire nucleotide composition, entire molar composition of it, and it's wrapped with a protein. The toxicity really doesn't depend on that. And we'd heard about in the film, it's also a process, right? Where there's a process of making a new adeno-associated virus. There's a process of getting a new ASO, is just changing the bases. When we start thinking about things like process, maybe we can start thinking about drug development, not as making new products that FDA has to approve, but more like surgeries, right? Or the practice of medicine, as FDA calls it, where a surgeon is able to potentially even innovate a new surgery just based on their skill, their medical training, the approval of, and the informed consent of the family, as well as a local regulatory guidance. So imagine a situation where my daughter, she's 2, if she were born at Boston Children's Hospital and she had an anatomical heart defect, right? There had been a pediatric surgeon that would see her, they would evaluate her, determine the intervention. It could be very N of 1 because everyone's anatomy is different, the medical history is different. And then you deliver the care in a very systematic way, and that's that, it's routine. Now, the difference between these patients that you've seen in the film is that they have a genetic instead of anatomical pathology, right? And that means that they probably will never see the treatment that if it kicks off on day 1 and goes through a routine process, they might never see that because it's 5 years or $50 million. So I encourage you to think about how this process with these modern genetic tools that we have, modern genetic medicines, can turn into more a routine surgical process. And that's the way that we're going to help more patients with rare disease.
I'll jump in because I'm not a doctor or scientist. I have the vantage point of being, a journalist and thinking about the marketing of rare. And so that's, and Ethan Perlson said it well. It's like, rare it's almost a misnomer because it turns people off. So there's a consortium of people that are working to try and think about a sort of strategic marketing campaign to raise rare in the culture so that to help people care. Leave the science to you all, but if you, similar to cancer, that the whisper down the lane about cancer was a thing 30 or 40 years ago, and it was a marketing campaign that helped people in the general population lean into cancer and start to understand this is important. Everyone suffers from this. You will know somebody. And a group of us are wanting to think about rare in the same respect, like, how do we find a marketing campaign to help people lean into rare disease so that the zeitgeist of, whether it's sports teams or fashion or the media or, you're seeing rare disease more in the culture. And so it's not just science that we're worrying about, in terms of rare disease. We're trying to capture the society and in ways like, maybe you see rare disease on billboards in Times Square, or you see it at the Met Gala because it's a rare gala, or you see a rare Jordan sneaker come out or something, where people think about rare and they're not afraid of it. So that's kind of, aside from the science, what needs to happen to bring rare disease into the conversation, into the culture a little more.
Very important. I think bringing awareness addresses a lot of issues within the larger ecosystem. We always find that it's that redundancy. There's always more to be done in terms of education, access, equitable treatments, but just the overall awareness of the challenges for rare disease. I mean, for those of us in the industry, when we look at your film, for example, it's a lot of the same challenges we've had 10 years ago. I mean, it's gotten easier in terms of research and leveraging AI, but it's still a lot of the same issues we've had for quite a while. Anyone else like to chime in on that?
Yeah, I'll build on that. I think one of the things that is encouraging and I'm excited by is one of the challenges in the first place is identifying the babies with rare conditions, right? So obviously, newborn screening looks for these things, and using metabolic conditions, we're trying to incorporate genomics into this. And the reason why that segues into the excitement is because when we started the consortium back in 2022, we only knew of 8 programs around the world that were doing clinical trials in genomic newborn screening. There were a handful here in the US, some in Australia, and a couple in Europe. And since we started the program, we have the consortium has swelled to over 700 people, over 50 countries. And now we know of somewhere between 60 and 70 programs around the world.
Wow.
So the level and the scale to which this has been adopted and is still being adopted is growing every single year, almost every single month, we learn of new programs. And there are some really exciting programs happening around the world. The UK is leading the charge in some aspects with the generation study. They're screening 100,000 babies, and the NHS is fully behind this. In fact, they're the ones that are funding this. So a lot of eyes are on the UK to see what the results are, the feasibility of incorporating this into their public health system, and then what decisions will be made. There's still a lot of work to do around the ethics, the policy, the economics, and so on, but there's a lot of really great work being done. Other really exciting advances. Historically, this has been a realm, the genomic numerous screening world has been a research-oriented field. This year, just maybe like 4 or 5 months ago, Puglia, Italy announced that they were going public with this. So they implemented it, genomic numerous screening for their population. So it's offered to every newborn in Puglia, Italy. And then just about a month or two ago, Abu Dhabi announced the same thing. So they're screening all of their newborns. And so those are the very first two. It happened this year. Dr. Robert Green, who I've worked with and who you know, he recently gave a TED Talk, which was released just last month on genomic newborn screening. So a lot more attention has been given to that. And also Dr. Green with a cohort of other leaders were announced for an NIH Beacon study, which is basically looking at the feasibility of incorporating genomics into the U.S. public health system for newborn screening. So there's an enormous amount of progress. There's still tremendous amounts of work to be done across many different layers. So it's not something that we'll see tomorrow. And we are seeing it in other countries. So I think that's going to increase some pressure for the U.S. to respond as well, which is also a good thing. Competition is always good. But it really gives me hope that we'll start seeing genomics in the screening world within the next, I'm guessing, 5 to 10 years, hopefully. It's a complicated path in the U.S. for sure, but I think we're seeing the light a little bit more. And so that gives me hope that we'll be able to identify these babies sooner to the point that we can intervene much quicker and have much more positive results.
The fact that it grew from 8 programs to what you said, 60 to 70 programs, what attributed or contributed to that success? I mean, that's explosive. So kind of Delaney's point around driving awareness, it sounds like that was the backbone of it. Can you kind of walk us through what you think made that grow in such a short amount of time?
I think it's a combination of things. Number one is there were a lot of programs nobody knew about because these were smaller research programs that we weren't familiar with. Some were in Asia and other places that we didn't hear about. But I think, so that's some percentage of that. It's a smaller percentage. I think the broader one is that this has really grown from a niche research setting to what countries are seeing as the future of newborn screening and potentially ushering in a world of preventive care and precision medicine at population scales. So as we're seeing the results coming from generation study in other countries that are very advanced in this, Australia has like 5 programs on this, right? So they're very bullish on this. I think that's really getting people motivated to do the same work and build on the shoulders of some of these people. So now we have countries in the Middle East, we have more countries in Europe. You have more countries in Europe actually spawning some programs. We have countries in Asia. We actually have some countries starting to come out of Latin America as well. Ecuador is looking into this. And so I think it's just really growing into a movement. And then I think the work that we've done also in kind of uniting all these voices into one big bullhorn has also made it into something that's grown from kind of fringe research labs into something that's become a little bit more in the cognitive, kind of like in the awareness of society. And so since we started the program, we've also started seeing much more recognition from the big organizations like in the US, the NIH, CDC, APHL, abroad, NHS, and so on. And so they've started listening, they've started interacting, they started coming to the conference and actually presenting. So I've seen it swell from something that was, again, a handful of programs into something that's growing. We learn of new programs almost every other month.
Yeah. No, it's impressive. It's motivation to change a challenge or to fix a challenge. It sounds like it contributed to a lot of the somewhat overnight success. Opening a question for all the panelists, and if I don't get any hand raises, I'm going to ask Tim and Winston potentially. there are some additional challenges that have been expressed in the film, but also there are inherent challenges in each one of your fields. If we can start with Winston and Tim, N of 1 is particularly challenging. So how does the N of 1 consortium hope to address those? What challenges did you have that no longer having, or you've, again, with that sense of motivation and collaboration for the N of 1 collaborative, if you will?
Maybe I'll take a first stab.
Yeah, you did the thing.
You can correct and fill in all the things I missed. I'll try to tie this answer back to some of the comments that have already been made here.
Please.
I think that the first challenge has to do with our concept of what N of 1 means. N of 1 is a lonely term. It really kind of invites you, like the term rare, it invites to really you to think about the plight of the N of 1. And it also poses the challenges that were described about an N of 1 disease seeming to require its own separate trial. And that concept, on one hand, the N of 1 term serves a purpose to kind of highlight the precision intervention required to help somebody, but it also suffers from the fact that we live in a structure where, at the moment, any given molecular entity is its own approval process, its own trial, and its own sort of very careful FDA panel review, like Pat Furlong showed in the film. And that's a real problem unless you get to redefine the terms with which you are playing the game. And that's where this concept of organ transplants and developing these ideas and parallels, other metaphors for thinking about this space are so important. Instead of thinking about specific molecular entities, we think about a process that you use an amazing flexible tool like a gene edit to not elicit an organ transplant, but a gene transplant or a base transplant. And to refactor this so that we get out of, it is a rare disease, yes. It has an alphabet soup gene name associated with it. But really what it needs is a common intervention. And so I think that making that mind switch has been one of the important transitions of the N of 1 collaborative to help go from the plight of the N of 1 to then sort of talk about common solutions. How do you do that? Well, or what are the advantages of doing that? If you can pull about that switch and get regulators to think this way, and then couch their criteria for reimbursement that way, then you can really change the system. Then you can also break out of this jail we've created for ourselves by considering every molecule its own entity and its own IP and its own little nugget that you build an IP fortress of patents around. Now, actually, and focusing now on the process, you can actually now see about combining data and experiences from applying that process to lots of patients and pull that data together to make the process better and better and better. Instead of sitting on your little gold heap of treasured learnings from one given molecule, you can actually now pool that together and then actually make the platforms mature more quickly.
Yeah.
So I think those are some of the driving forces, but Winston, please.
So I'm going to add on to what Tim said with the this concept of loneliness and this idea that really, if you have, it can be, so N1 treatments, the reason why they can move so quickly is because they're built on a common platform, right? There's a whole foundation of knowledge already established that allows you to move fast, have the appropriate benefit risk, and help patients. And these platforms often are used to treat many patients in a more commercial disease and these N of 1s. So what happens is that for the many, many patients, right, you submit data to the FDA and they review it. They actually see everything, right? They see all the N of fews and the N of manys, and they're like, "Oh, we wish we could tell you, like, here be dragons. Like, don't go here. Like, try this," but they can't. Statute prevents them from doing that. Like, literally, laws say they have to protect the confidentiality. Well, is there a way actually in these N of few spaces that intentionally we should share because we feel lonely, and an ASO that's a couple base pairs different from another ASO, instead of having just investigators who cannot learn from each other, we intentionally say we want to share because it helps patients, it helps the investigator, it helps the overall field. And I think that's the nugget that we're trying to capitalize upon of, taking what Tim templated, right, with Mealison and saying, now, if more people follow this template, let's just create this pre-competitive database where we're sharing here. Maybe one day, folks in industry will also say, oh, there's a treasure trove of learnings. We too can support this and benefit, even if we keep our piece of it, still for good business practices separated too. So that's the idea. Can we grow the platform learnings overall? And I think we've sort of now, there's more of a nugget of that than there was 5 years ago. Yeah.
It's great. Any other challenges that were challenges that are no longer challenges?
Can I talk about the access thing, right? Like,
Yes,
I think
please.
Lainey, the last, the word of saying how these families are incredibly privileged to be able to tackle these and just they have the time, they might have the money for whatever reason to do this. I think that's incredibly true. But to me also what's really challenging is that without so I guess the specific question is, how do you think about providing greater equitable access to those who are working 2 jobs and then you have a child with a rare disease? And maybe my controversial take is that in the beginning it's not, right? But what you're also not seeing is these families are taking on the burden of development, that benefit risk. Like they don't know if it's going to potentially seriously harm their child, right? And to me, that's one of the reasons why we're so motivated to just try and make this routine like surgery, right? You just go to the doctor. You don't have to have big sales for $2 million. You go there and that's just the standard practice. And that's the way it can get to more people when it becomes just normal versus like a bespoke process that you have to come in with a pile of money and say, I'd like to do this.
It's so unfair.
Yeah.
It's so unfair for the burden to be on the parents. And that in the foreseeable future isn't going to change unless the paradigm shifts.
Yeah.
And all the parents know that they have to be the ones. And it is on the shoulders of the ones like you've seen in the film who have the good fortune of being able to do this and not be working 3 different jobs, and
Yeah.
but it is on their shoulders that they're moving the science forward and accelerating it for everyone. So it just needs to change that a child is diagnosed in a newborn screening and the medical world is there to embrace them and tell them what the next steps are instead of saying good luck and sent home to do it themselves.
Yeah.
Alexander, any challenges that you've experienced recently and again in your lab work that you feel there's a pathway forward? And again, same question for you too, Johanna.
Just thinking about the comment that Lainey made, the first thing that comes to mind is people ask, well, why do you pick this rare disease to do preclinical research on versus another one or a more common disease? And I think for us, there is an altruistic aspect of it where, it's a no-brainer that we need to test our new technologies on some target. And, we prioritize targets that, will not necessarily be picked up by industry in some cases, right? Because they are rare. And then in other cases, we have these rare disease patient advocates who come to us, and as demonstrated in, the great documentary, that they are like the ultimate project manager, basically. And they are catalysts that can cut out, a year and a half, 2 years of team building to know who the clinicians are, who the basic biologists are, where the biobank samples are, and how to kind of connect all the dots to build like a team that you actually need to have to do a proof of concept to show that, okay, there is some avenue here to do, precision gene editing or to do an ASO or some other genetic modality. And not all genetic diseases will benefit from a superstar like that, right? And that's probably a challenge for those groups. As we had a really promising proof of concept story for a target that I work on, and now we're looking towards translation, and we're realizing there's a lot of other groups who are facing this kind of situation. Where, as Kat said in the documentary, the regulators are familiar with small molecules, they're familiar with common diseases, but the rule sets that they're trying to apply to emerging technologies like precision gene editing are they're untested, and we have to work with them, or we have to anticipate what they will or won't understand in the process as we try and define what is safe and what is not safe for our kind of tools. And we're looking to other groups that are going for proof of concept to the next steps to try and compare notes and see what do we have to present to bring these technologies forward as safe.
On the theme of collaboration, Joanna, anything to add?
Well, I could just add like specific challenges in the field of drug repurposing. Obviously, and I think it's been said in the film, there is no financial incentive. So if tomorrow I figure out that we can use a generic drug to treat a rare disease, well, who's going to pay for the trial to actually prove that it works and include that in the guideline and make it a new norm? So that's a big challenge. And on the other side, you have potential drugs that are expensive that have been developed for a common disease, but you do need a trial tool to prove that it works in a rarer disease. So these are real questions, but I feel like the field is moving and the FDA is starting to open the door to like dedicated pathway for drug repurposing. It's not done yet, but
Right.
I feel like with the rise of the rise of AI tools, the faster route to these treatments that we observe, it's going to enforce sort of a new regulatory pathway.
It's
I hope.
exciting. Fingers crossed for sure, but that's exciting. Before we wrap everything up, are there any questions from the audience? I think we have 2 microphones here. If anyone from the audience would like to ask a question. No one gets up. I will continue on my questions. Okay, so my last question really for you, Lainey, is what's next, right? So that you have this amazing film. What are your plans for kind of using that film as a continuation of your platform, or how can the audience get involved in your mission? What's next for
The film
movie?
needs to find a home on a streaming platform so more people can see it. And we're in the process of trying to find, everyone says, well, why doesn't Netflix pick it up? And if anyone knows anyone at Netflix, let me know. We're working on that, and we're trying to build momentum to find a home for it. But, what's next is tell your friends. Part of the mission and the social impact campaign of this film is raising awareness so people come away from it that are the uninitiated, that don't know anything about rare disease. And, I've heard comments like, wow, this has made me look at disability differently, or I had no idea. Or a rare disease family will say, gosh, it's the first time I feel seen and heard. So, there are a lot of different ways that people react to this film. And, I just want to continue to get the message out that rare matters and rare informs common disease, and we should all be caring about raising awareness.
Thank you. Great words to end on. Rare matters. So please, thanks to all of our panelists tonight. With that, thank you so much for Rally for Rare. Stay tuned. There's more to come for us for next year for Rally for Rare. And thank you. Have a great evening.